Why is the Australian Aboriginal Alcohol Ban tolerated? Am I missing something? As a note on the new bans, each community, if agreed by at least 60% of adults in the community, can apply to opt themselves out of the alcohol ban, along with an approved alcohol plan. I agree. It would appear from other countries that these bans are blatant racism. But it is a well-intentioned short to medium-term stopgap solution to an ongoing problem that is hard for governments to solve without huge and ongoing expense, i.e. it's the easiest solution. Alice Springs resident here. Lots of misinformation in the story and in the comments. The reinstatement of the previous laws was because of the rise in crime in Alice Springs and risk of harm to families from DV and alcohol-related trauma, which included poor supervision of young people, leading to increased crime. Aboriginal people can still buy alcohol and drink in Alice Springs. What has changed is opening hours of shops that sell alcohol and restrictions on places you can drink it. Places at highest risk of domestic and alcohol-fueled violence are now dry, and this is a huge positive for Indigenous families and children in town. Communities have mostly returned to their previously dry state. Again, a huge positive for families at risk of alcohol-related violence. This is a band-aid as to why there is a problem with alcohol in the first place. But the band-aid protects a lot of vulnerable people. The alcohol bans for Australian Aborigines originated from women within the communities asking for it. There is a massive problem with domestic violence, rape and incestuous rape of children within their communities in the outback, plus huge substance abuse problems that start in childhood. It's not an easy problem to fix. The Aboriginal community has a horror and distrust of most governmental organizations and the majority culture because of genocidal policies in the past. What many Native communities have in common is the very high number of people suffering from alcoholism. For the longest time, people subscribed to the theory that this high percentage of people depending heavily on alcohol may have to do with a genetic predisposition to tolerate alcohol badly. But nowadays researchers propose that it's more likely a result of social conditioning and poverty. And this is where bans on selling of alcohol in native territories all over the world come from. Because the common logical justification for this is that these communities suffer badly under the overwhelming number of people fall into alcoholism, and that this pandemic of self-destructive alcohol consumption has to be limited. A second thing that feeds into this narrative is that such native communities are often rather locally condensed and isolated, either due to historical limitation to reservations or extreme poverty that pushes them to the fringes of society. Often both. So instead of trying to solve the social isolation and poverty, and help people to improve themselves, governments often attempt to solve the issue by limiting access to substances. It is generally way harder and way more complicated to attempt and fight poverty and social isolation, let alone more expensive. In a way, it's also supposed to force alcohol sellers out of these communities so they can no longer pull the little money there is out of the community. Much like Australia, for instance, is combating tobacco consumption by forbidding to sell it to everyone born after 2014. So it's not so much racism here, but is generally understood as the cheapest way to combat the alcoholism pandemic. These communities are suffering, and the subsequent increase in crime and poverty. It's a pretty bad way to try and do this, and still tastes a lot of colonialist superiority complex in action. But well, there we are. A lot of Aboriginals requested it to be instated then reinstated, because it works. But a lot of people, including many Aboriginals, are against it as they see it, rightly so, as a band-aid pasted over deeper wounds that cause problems, but it's a band-aid that stops crime. To an extent, it's a really messy situation, and I have to admit that my sympathies are with the people protected by the lower assault and rape rates in the communities over people who can't get their booze. Having said that, I'm also for deeper and longer-term problem solving that just doesn't get done. It's just a horrible situation that arises from a culture being destroyed by colonization and an undercurrent of racism that stops people being disinterested in fixing it. I had to build some schools and community centers, and they made us create secret doors for the staff to escape if something happened. We don't have secret doors for the other communities. Let's just leave it at that. Safety first. Pretty sure the elders are for it, because they have no other way of stopping their people from dying to alcoholism. There was actually outrage over a botlio being built out in NT like last year because they said it would harm their people. The decision is basically made by those it affects. Outsider opinions aren't needed. It needs to be pointed out that the problems of Aboriginal peoples of Australia are very different to that of Black people of America. Alcohol and crime is a big problem in towns with higher Aboriginal population. This is a mix of very complex issues which range from systemic poverty to bad individual choices. People may say it's racist, but there is a problem that is unique to Aboriginal communities, and it needs to be solved uniquely. You can't paste fixes that work for one culture into another and expect it to work. Edit. https web.archive.org/web/202303140046/https www.nytimes.com/2023/world/australia/AliceBringsAlcohol.html. The link above in the original New York Times article 1 read. Thanks to you, the Coat 9, for finding it. It's required. Alcohol literally destroyed their communities. Most Aboriginal elders request it because it works. We have similar rules up here in Alaska. Tons of small rural communities either have an alcohol ban or you can't buy it in town, but you can import it. Remember, the elders didn't want alcohol to be allowed. They said it would cause problems. It did. It caused huge problems. We've reinstated it as a result of elders demanding it. Because of the Stolen Generation incident, many Indigenous Australians don't feel a connection to their country or culture. This leads to high rates of alcoholism as well as the normal devastation alcohol has on any Indigenous people. I believe about the alcohol ban is supported by community leaders, and in the papers it shows there has already been a large reduction in all the nasty things alcohol abuse causes. About a decade ago they had to switch their gasoline to a different type that doesn't give off fumes because Indigenous persons there were inhaling them. The Stolen Generation incident was early when Australia was still a British colony. They came and removed the children from their parents and resettled them so they could grow up white. They didn't keep records, so most of these children could never find their parents and family again. Because the Indigenous Australians passed down their traditions and culture through voice only. This effective because what some people have described as an unintentional genocide. It's unarguably the single worst incident in Australia's entire history, not including colonization in the first place. Oklahoma also had some really stringent laws regarding alcohol until fairly recently. The Indian, native population here is the third highest in America, around 10%, and I suspect it has something to do with it. It may not be predicated on overt racism, but systemic problems. I am an Australian and I actually traveled around Australia, including places like Broome. Alice Springs and everywhere in between, and you really see how destructive alcohol is there. In Broome I literally saw a group of Aboriginals all day in the park just drinking. So while there definitely is an argument this on grounds of it being discriminatory, I can see how it's the most practical solution. There is also some additional context here, which is that Aborigines have almost no physical tolerance. Europeans, Middle East have been drinking alcohol for tens of thousands of years, whereas Aboriginals have been isolated for 50,000 years. I.e., the first time they touched alcohol is when the British colonizers landed there not long ago. This means that typically Aboriginals can get intoxicated on very minor amounts of alcohol, such as half-third of a standard bottle of beer. I have seen this myself. While there are other cultures that apparently have similar issues, i.e. Asian countries, although even then it's different. See South Korea with soju and Japan with whiskey, beer, sake. There is also an added facet of Aboriginal life that compounds on top, which is that their lifestyle, culture is incredibly foreign. I.e. they have no real concept of money and they are nomads, and throwing alcohol into this mix didn't help. They do the same thing way up north with the Eskimos. I don't even know, that's probably not the correct term anymore. Maybe far northern indigenous communities. Anyways, alcohol is very illegal in some of those communities. Frowned upon in the same way as if it were meth or something. What's weird, and I don't fault you for not knowing this, but this is very common in the US for Native Americans and indigenous Alaskans where I'm from. In some parts of AK you're not allowed even Listerine or anything with alcohol. Alcoholism is a severely debilitating public health problem. It's substance abuse that echoes into every other part of their lives, correlating with domestic and sexual violence. It's not a ban to police behavior and enforce strict moral standards or just prohibit people from enjoying things you and I might like. But it's an actual public health policy out in place to help. Alaska has dry villages as well. The amount of problems alcohol causes for these small communities outweighs what little benefit there is for allowing it. Native Alaskan alcoholism is a huge problem in the villages and in the big cities. The issue of alcohol bans in Aboriginal communities in Australia is a complex one with a long history. Alcohol is a major contributor to social and health problems in many Aboriginal communities, including high rates of domestic violence, child abuse, and poor health outcomes. The issue of implementing an alcohol ban in these communities is complex, as it involves balancing individual rights, public health concerns, cultural factors, and political considerations. One argument for the alcohol ban in Aboriginal communities is that it is necessary to protect the health and safety of their residents. Critics of the policy argue that it is discriminatory and stigmatizes Aboriginal communities, perpetuating harmful stereotypes. There are also concerns that the alcohol ban may be ineffective and may drive people to seek alcohol from other sources, contributing to the growth of an illegal black market. Ultimately, the issue of alcohol bans in Aboriginal communities is a complex one that requires careful consideration of a range of factors. The debate over this policy will likely continue for some time, but it is important to keep in mind the underlying issues of health and safety that are at stake. A lot of Australians are very uncomfortable with this. I remember when the first law was implemented and we called it the racist intervention. Social problems in Aboriginal communities and remote communities are so complex. But the bans do pertain to entire communities, not just Aboriginal people in those communities.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.